Okay, hello and welcome everyone. So today we will be looking at how we can export our models from Maya into Substance Painter 2, where we can texture them, and how to export the textures we will be getting out of Substance Painter back into Maya. So the topics we will cover today include duplicating and smoothing the mesh, exporting mesh to Substance Painter. We will take a look at fill layers and normal layers. We will take a look at masks, brushes, and materials. And we will also learn how to export textures and apply them back. So if we go into Maya and take a look at what I've got here so far, so this is everything that I will be exporting. As you can see, I'm leaving some elements like the eye, for example, and teeth geometry and tongue behind, so I don't really want to be texturing them in Substance Painter. But this is what I've got so far. I will show you what the UV map looks like really quickly as well. So you can see everything sort of has its own space, nothing is really overlapping, so it's completely fine and it renders well. So also, as you can see, we are not in the smooth preview mode at the moment. So if we take a look at our UV map and I go into my smooth preview by pressing 3, you will see that the UV layout doesn't change, so all the edges stay the same way, but you can sort of see that we're getting a little bit of smoothing for the inside edges. So what we want to do now, because we sort of want to be working with that high poly geometry in Substance Painter as well, we want to take whatever we have on the screen so far and duplicate it and smooth it, and use that duplicated mesh as the geometry we will be bringing into Substance Painter. So not our original geometry, but a duplicated version of it. And ideally, if everything goes fine, we should be able to reapply the textures we get from our Substance Painter back onto the original model, and we shouldn't be running into any problems with it. So what I'm going to do now, I will just press Ctrl D on my keyboard, and I want to unparent the geometry as well, so Shift P, just not to confuse it with the rest of it, and I want to move it out just for now. So from here, what I want to do is to smooth it out. So as you probably know, you can find it under modeling, mesh, and we're looking for smooth. So in the option box, you can specify how many division levels you will be getting out of this. So I think we'll go with 1 for this one. And also notice the settings for the UVs I have here. So they seem to be working really well, and there is no, or almost no difference between the UVs of this model, the original one, and the smooth one. So we'll just hit apply. We can close this window. And now we can take a look if there is much difference between the UVs of the new mesh and the old one in the smooth mode. So if I just smooth this out really quickly, and I click on this one, so as you can see, the edges are the same. So I don't expect any problems to happen when we apply materials belonging to this model to our original one. So we can close this. And I will also hide my original geometry just for now, Ctrl H. And we can take all of this and put it back to where it was before. And so from here, all we need to do is just to make sure that everything is clean, and we can get rid of the history and freeze transforms. And we can take all of this and export it as an OBJ file. So from here, with everything selected, we can export this. We'll just have to go under File and Export Selection, and we're looking for OBJ Export. So if you don't have this option, just make sure that you have the plugin turned on, and then you should be able to export it as an OBJ. So one thing worth mentioning before we do anything else is that this particular model has one material for all of those elements. I think excluding the eyes and the rest of the geometry, which we're not exporting. So there are kind of positive and negative aspects to it. So, for example, when you import something into Substance Painter, and if you have more than one material, it means that you can work with those materials individually, and you would be able to hide different parts of your mesh by hiding the materials associated with them. Unfortunately, we won't be able to do it with this one, so I will be just using a lot of masking so that I won't get any bleeding on the texture. So bleeding is when you draw on one part of the texture or on one UV shell, and then you notice that just because it's so close to another part of your model, you will start getting a little bit of that paint information on the other part. So that's why we will be looking into using masks quite a bit. While, of course, it's easier when you have more materials set up. For instance, if I had a material set up for each individual part of this model, it would be easier in a way, but it means that we are creating way too many textures, and if you decide to use high-resolution textures, it means that your rendering time will be much longer. So I've already exported this model, but I will do it again. So for me, it's just Skylander Substance Painter 2. LBJ, and just export selection, so we don't really need to change anything on the right side. As you can see, I have everything turned on. And from here, we can go into our Substance Painter. So my version is a little bit outdated, but it shouldn't be too much of a problem. Just make sure that you maybe update yours. So we want to go under File, New, because we will be working with a new project. So for the template, we will just be using PBR metallic roughness. In terms of the mesh, we just need to select our mesh. So I just need to find it really quickly in here. You can leave the other things as they are, so create a texture set for UDIM. We're not using any tiling for our model, so we don't have to worry about it. DirectX is fine. Document resolution, so you can go as high as 4K. I think it's probably not a bad idea for a model like this. We can always downscale later on. You can also import your own textures, so if you have generated some more textures in other programs, so for example in XNormal, or maybe you painted some of the information for your model in Photoshop, you can import those textures and apply them to your object here, and then you will just be adding new color information on top of that. But we don't really have anything set up, so we can just be using the default where we're not importing anything. So from here you can click OK, and you should be able to see your model imported. So there's a lot of things happening, but on the screen at the moment, all you need to worry about is this screen. So this is close to Maya's perspective screen. This is what you would normally expect to see in Photoshop, so you can paint directly here in this material window. Here you have your layers, so it's quite close to Photoshop as well. Here is what I was talking about before. So this model is using the initial shading group material from Maya. And if we had more of those, we could just separate them by clicking and hiding the objects we don't really want to see. So this is where we can see our materials. This is where we can change our brush settings and find new alpha textures for the brushes, use stencils. Also here you can see different channels that our material might be using. And this window is where you can find or where you can assign your original textures that you just imported. So you could just click on those and put them in here. This is our display settings, where you can change field of view, focus distance, and things like that. I usually don't use it that often. Viewer settings is quite cool. This is where you can change different parameters of your environmental map. So as you can see, we're getting a little bit of this yellowish lighting, which is coming from an HDRI map. So we could, instead of using this panorama, we could use any one of those, and they would kind of change the way we'll view the model a little bit. At the moment it's set to be opaque, or sorry, transparent, meaning that we don't see it anywhere on the screen, but we could change that as well. Just over here. Could also change the amount of blur you're getting if you wanted to have a proper picture behind the character. Maybe you're rendering it out or something like that. I usually keep it off. This is showing which shader we're using, which is our standard PBR metal roughness. So just to talk about the PBR really quickly, it's physically based rendering, which is used by most of the modern gaming engines, but it's also used in Arnold in Maya, meaning that we will be able to use the textures from Substance Painter and implement them back into Maya with a little bit of a setup, which is discussed in another video. But for now, that's really all you need to know. So over here is your log, which is showing if you're getting any errors or anything like that, it will be reflected over here. And the shelf contains the rest of the information where you can change your brushes, change your materials, or you can look for smart materials and things like that. So this is quite useful. Cool, so for this character, I will just show you the original setup for him. I will not be texturing everything today with you, so I will just show you the basic techniques so you can start working on texturing your own character. So the first thing I would probably want to do is to set up the skin tone for the character. At the moment, everything just looks white and shiny because there is no real proper information anywhere. So I usually like to start with either a smart material from here, or a normal material, and the difference between them is that with the smart materials you can change quite a lot of settings. So you can see here, for example, we have this fabric woodland dirty. If we applied it to the character, we would be able to change a couple of different settings for this texture. Like we could change the resolution, we could make the pattern bigger or smaller, we could rotate it around. So you don't have the same flexibility with normal materials. But let's take a look really quickly at one of those first. So let's say we wanted to make his chest metallic. So it can be some sort of maybe dark steel or something like that. Cool, so with those materials we can just drag and drop them onto our character. And you will see that it's going to take some time for it to load properly. This is where it's being reflected, the progress bar. Cool, so what happens by default is that this material gets applied to the overall model, which is not really what we want. We just want it to have for this particular part of the model. And potentially we can reuse the same material for this bit as well, if we wanted to. So this is what we currently have. It's a folder containing a lot of information about the actual material itself. And you can see if you start turning things on and off, you can see how the model changes. You can also see that there are different modes for all of those layers as well, so you can play around with those. They're really similar to what you have in Photoshop. And also this particular metal texture is using a special effect, which you can apply to all of your textures, but we're not going to go that in depth. So you can see that you can change the amount of roughness for this particular part of the material if you wanted to get a different look. So with roughness, white means that the material is quite rough. So if you think about maybe your desk, computer desk, and usually the surface is really, it's not mirror-like, so there is a lot of imperfections and things like that, and that's why the light reflects of it in a very particular way. That's why the surface is not really reflective. So white for roughness means that it's quite rough, while if you go closer to black, you will start seeing that the material becomes more and more reflective. So we can go as high as to 0 or black color, meaning that now it's almost like a mirror. So with metal, they usually recommend to go for either 1 or 0, although I found that it depends on what you're trying to achieve. But the idea behind it is that your material is either metallic or not, and if it is, then you put the metallic to 1, which is just over here, and if it's not, you just put it down to 0. Cool, and so if we really take a look at what else we have here. So to zoom in and zoom out, I'm just using the middle mouse scroll. Panning is Alt and middle mouse. Zooming in, Alt and right click. And then rotation is just your Alt and left click. So it's really similar to what Maya has. So at the moment I'm just playing with the UV scale, and you can see how it's sort of, you start noticing the repetition for the those scratchy elements, so potentially leaving that at 2 is fine. We can also rotate those elements if we wanted to. Cool, so you can play around with the different options and just see what they do. That's how I was learning about the program. So what we want to do from here is to specify a mask, so that we're not getting the same metallic look for any of the other elements of this model. Although potentially, just for now, I might leave it on the belt, and also just here on the wrist guards, or whatever they might be called. So if we click on this tiny little icon at the top of your layers window, you can go and add either a black or a white mask, or also if you imported masks previously when we were creating the project, you could use a bitmap mask. So if you made one in Photoshop yourself, you could use it here as well. But what we will be doing, probably, we will start with a black mask, meaning that we won't be able to see any of this information on the screen, and we will start adding it back. Cool. So same as in Photoshop, you have an option to either manipulate your proper layer containing the color or roughness and metallic information, or you can work on the mask. So you just have to switch between what you're working on at the moment. Also, as you can see, at the moment we're setting, a base color. So potentially you could, instead of working with base color, you could start just working on the roughness channel, for example. So those are your different channels that you can be manipulating later on. But at the moment, we're just going to stay in base color, just for now. So from here, the mode I usually like to use, instead of trying to paint this information back in, and just to be able to switch between the colors really quickly, you can press X on your keyboard, so same as in Photoshop. Or you can change the color from here. It's just using this grayscale option, so we can specify how transparent or how opaque we want something to be, with black being transparent and white being opaque. But for this particular case, I want to use my polygon fill. It's quite a quick way of doing this. And you will see that this has changed a little bit, so we have different fill modes: triangle fill, polygon, mesh, and UV chunk fill, which we will probably try it out in a second and see if it works or not. So this is one of the UV shells that we want to use, and I want to give it a white color. Cool. So that was extremely simple. And as you can see in this tiny preview, it was just updated, and we can see that this particular part of our UV Maps mask became white, meaning that it's opaque now. So we want to find another UV shell, which we want to make of this metallic color. And I think it might be this one. No, this one. The neck. Okay, so this element, and also two of those. So for those guys, because I think they're not separated properly, if we tried to fill them in, let's try it again. Cool, so that's one of them, and we just need to find another one. Actually, because I overlaid those UV shells back in Maya, it means that I can work on them together. Cool, so that's one part of the thing done, I guess. So for those two elements at the back and at the front of his chest, I want to try and use another material. So we're not painting just yet, we're just playing around with different materials just to see what they actually do and what they look like. So we'll see if we can, instead of using smart material this time, we could use just a normal simple material. And we can try and use this gold pure. So for this, all we need to do is to then just drag this material onto our layers again. And so, as you can see, what happened now is that this material got applied to everything except for our metallic parts. And because it's sitting at the bottom, it means that, okay, all of those parts, all of the black bits will be transparent, so we will be able to see this gold material coming through. But what we actually want to do, we want to do the same thing as what we did with the metallic parts. So we want to just have this on particular elements of this model. So we'll add another black mask. And we'll use our UV fill again. So you can play around with polygon fill as well, just to see what the difference is. So you can zoom in and out on this material view as well. I think it looks quite nice. Potentially, I want to change something for the mask of the metallic part, and I want to switch it to being black again. So what I want to do now is to get some texture for the skin going, and unlike everything else, I want the skin to be quite rough for this particular character. And we can achieve that. I will show you how to do that in a second. So we'll start with the base material for that. So maybe something like this, and actually we'll put it down behind the rest of the layers. So as you can see, what happens here at the moment on the right side is that we have those channels turned on, including the roughness and metal. So we could play around with those if we wanted to, if we wanted to make this material more shiny or less shiny. For this character, I don't actually want to have any roughness on the skin. You're more than welcome to do so, to have some. And as you can see, our metallic option is turned off. And so from here, if you're happy with the color, I'll probably go with something a little bit different. Also, we can create another mask just really quickly so that this doesn't annoy you later on. So we'll go and create a we'll probably create a white one, or maybe let's go with the black again. And the same type of setup. We will just want to specify which elements we want to have colored. Cool. And we can go out of this mode now. We can go to our paint mode and switch back to this particular layer. So there is two different type of layers in Substance Painter. There is a fill layer and a normal layer. So I will show you what we do. This is our fill layer. If we edit it right now, it would override everything. And you can't paint on it, so you can change its properties. You can turn things on and off by default, but you can't really paint on it. So as you can see, I'm in my paint mode, or at least I was supposed to be, but it doesn't let me, and it tells me that fill layers are not paintable. So they are good to be used as your default colors. for example. So instead of using this material, we could actually have just created a fill layer. But I wanted to show you the materials. Now get rid of this one. But we could create normal layers. So we had one created for us by default. It was our layer 1. And we just created a new one over here. And just to keep things consistent, I will leave this one on top of the previous one. And we can turn off everything that we don't want for this layer. So I know that I just want to add some color information. And let's say, so to be able to pick up color, you just need to kind of drag it around a little bit. But as you can see, it's also picking up different variants of the color. If we wanted to select exactly the same color as what we have on the screen, we need to go into the color mode. So we need to go into the channel which represents the color. So for this, what we could do is press C on our keyboard, and it tells you that C means show next channel. So at the moment we're in our base color. I usually work a lot on this particular channel because it just lets me see my textures without any additional information like roughness or metallic values. The next one will be height. So height is similar to bump maps. It changes the depth representation of your model. So you can add things like scratches using your height channel. Also, you could add them using your normal map or normal channel. So this is our roughness. As you can see, our skin is really rough, so no real reflections or anything like that, and that's why it's white. And for the metallic parts, we have this much darker color. If we press C again, this is our metallic channel. And this is our normal channel. So if you wanted to get rid out of this mode, all you have to do is to press M on your keyboard, and you're back into this material preview. If we go back to our base color, from here we can pick up this particular color, and you can see that it doesn't change. And then maybe you wanted to make it a little bit lighter. And if we go and find a different brush, so it's just under, sorry, on our shelf. If you go to brushes, there is a couple you can choose from. We could go with default soft, for example. And you can change the size of your brush by using square brackets, just like in Photoshop. And let's take a look at what the settings we have for the brush. So we can change the size from here. So we can change the flow. So I usually like to keep it quite low. Stroke opacity as well. And spacing. You can change the angle if you wanted to, and you can add all sorts of different things here, like size jitter, flow jitter, and so on and so forth. So at the moment I'm using mouse, so it's not going to be a very pretty experience, but ideally when you work with Substance Painter, you want to be using your graphics tablet. Even now I can start adding a little bit of lighting just to my to the top parts of the model. You could start doing the same for the arms. And because of the way I laid out my UVs, they're overlaying for those elements, meaning that the color information will be applied straight away to the other part. But if I didn't do that and I wanted to have the symmetry for this object so that I would only have to paint one side of it, what you can do is to put your symmetry on. So you just turn it on here, and as long as your model was in the 0 coordinates in Maya, it should be fine. So as you can see, it's not really symmetrical, this model, so there is a little bit of a difference, but it still picks up the symmetry quite well, just because it knows where the pivot point of everything was, or the center. And you can also change which axis you're mirroring across, so depending on how you work in Maya. Cool, and so just so that we can prove this, Because of the way I laid out the head, it's not symmetrical in terms of the UVs, but we could, do this and the color information will get applied properly. So you can erase things. The eraser is not as good as what Photoshop has, so just be mindful of that. It might give you a little bit of problems. So the same thing, if you wanted to focus on something, just press F to frame your selection. So this is not really what I wanted. It's really hard to work with just a mouse, but it's fine. You get the idea of what's happening on the screen. Also, if we wanted, we could just work here in our height. But I usually don't do it from here. So if we go back to the material view, what we can do instead, I would probably just create a new layer if I wanted to add a little bit of details on the face. So maybe this is our, if you wanted to rename something, I think you can just double click. We can add a new layer. This will be my bumps. So for this layer, what I want to have is, I want to have color and height. So height, if I go to the right of this slider, it means that I will be adding something that looks like it's protruding out of the skin. And going back, it will be the kind of intruding or going inwards. So we'll just see what it looks like, if it actually gives us any good result. For this particular scenario, I want to use a brush with hard edges, so I will just go with my default hard. And I will change the color to something like maybe light yellow, just for now. And so as you can see, we can sort of start adding those tiny little details. And of course, they would be much easier to see if we had a roughness associated with the skin as well. What we also could do, we could make those guys shiny. So if we add this roughness channel from here, and we just make it quite shiny. Look at how we're getting the reflection on those particular parts, but not on the skin. So this is really, really cool. And if we had our default soft brush, we could be getting a different result, right? Also, this is really useful for adding little details. Also, those little guys can be used to add a little bit more details to the brush you're using. So for example, you can use this in my normal color. I just drop it here. As you can see, instead of just having this default brush, now I'm adding a little bit like this tiny element to it as well, which is quite cool. Also, if I just create a new layer really quickly, so what we can do here, we can go with our height and turn everything else off. And let's say we go to our brushes again. Just maybe use this one for now. And we should be able to see how using this as height information changes the way our model is rendered on the screen. So this will be exported as a normal map. to Arnold. So you can start getting things like little scratches and things like that just by using this height information. If you wanted to go the other way, so if you wanted to create cuts and things like that, you can do that just by changing your height from the right side to the left. You can just start texturing the skin as well. So if you had your own special kind of masks, you could use them here and just apply them as height map information. So this is really, really useful to know how to do that. Cool, so let's say we're happy with the model and wanted to export the textures. So all we need to do, although this is shown in another video, but just really quickly, you can right click on the model and go export textures. And from here, this is the tab where you can change the configuration, so you can specify which maps exactly you want or don't want to have in your preset. So I think I will be happy with this one. We will not be using some of those maps, so we don't really have any emission or height, but we can delete them later on. So let's say we're happy with this particular configuration. So what we can do is go back to our export and change this to Arnold. And we can leave everything else by default, but I will probably change it from PNG to Targa. I think that should be fine, should be okay. So we can also change the size of the document from here if we wanted to. And if you open this up, it will just show you all of the maps that it will be creating. So you could override the padding, so the amount of kind of blur or bleed it adds between the UV shells, or kind of to the edge of your UV shells. So you can change that from here. The principle is that the higher resolution your map is, the more dilation you will need. But I think 16 pixels should be a good enough number. And over here you can specify your export folder if you wanted to do that. And I will just do my export, and I will really quickly show you the maps it has created, and from there you can go to the next video showing you how to set up those textures in Maya. So these are the maps that Substance Painter has created for us. As you can see, there's a couple of different ones, and you will be using most of them in the next setup. But as you can see, it doesn't look like anything at the moment, just because we haven't really spent much time working on this. But I hope that gave you an initial idea of how to use Substance Painter for texturing, how to use different materials and smart materials, and also how to paint your own textures using different brushes and applying masks and things like that. So hope you enjoyed the video, and until next time.